And today we're diving product challenges and emerging opportunities. And today we have a very special guest, also a friend. We have been here in Lisbon for, a few nights, not pun intended. Jason Knight. Jason is a fractional product leader, a coach, also a startup advisor. And that's actually how we met here in Lisbon. And the host of the popular podcast, One Night in Product. With over 20 years of experience in tech and product, Jason has helped B2B SaaS companies navigate challenges like scaling, aligning product strategy with team execution, and building strong product management processes. He's also the founder of One Night Consulting, where he advises organizations on overcoming growth pains to achieve scalable success. He's a mentor at startup accelerators like Ultra.vc. And today, we'll be discussing mostly strategies for scaling B2B SaaS, which is a topic that a lot of people reach out to us saying that they want to find more resources, they want to know more about it. So here we are. We're going to speak a little bit about it and also about driving innovation in challenging environments. I guess they're always challenging, but it is what it is. So welcome to the show, Jason. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. And I still fondly remember sitting in Lisbon and drinking and setting the world to rights as well. But I'm good. It's obviously the run up to Christmas. So you've got all the presents downstairs, the trees up. It's nearly the end of the working year and everything like that. So I'm feeling pretty good, but also excited to talk today and sort all of the problems of the world out.
All right. So before we dive in our podcast, we usually like to do 3 light questions. We call them like icebreakers. What's your favorite app or tech product right now?
Oh, my favorite app or tech product? That is a really good question. I mean, I don't want to just kind of take the easy option and say, ChatGPT or something like that, or agents or something like that. A little while back, I actually got very interested in, like, when the Apple Vision Pro came out, I'm like, yeah, let's get an Apple Vision Pro. But obviously I didn't have enough money to get an Apple Vision Pro and don't think I really needed to spend that amount of money on a thing. And it actually was a fantastic example of a sort of a high-end product kind of encouraging me to get the lower-end product. So I got like an Oculus, and not even an expensive Oculus, like the guitar on stage at a goth festival with my hair down to there, dyed black. And she showed it to everyone in the pub, like all the people in our group, and none of them could recognize it to be me. So that's, I guess, a little bit surprising for people when they see that, basically I used to have long black hair and a little stupid silver guitar playing power chords on stage at goth festivals. So that's a fact that not everyone knows about me.
All right. What kind of music were you playing back then?
So that was more, I guess you'd call it industrial. It was very sort of Nine Inch Nails flavored, bit of Gary Newman in there as well, bit of Prodigy, like various sort of kind of a mixture of electronic and rock. And actually, fun fact, I should be playing a kind of a reunion gig with that band next year in London, just to kind of, for old time's sake. So I've got my guitar down there somewhere and start to learn some of the songs again so that I can go and get my much older self onto stage and not make too much of a fool of myself. But, we'll see.
I can totally see you doing that. You do
I can't
fit the
headbang anymore
profile.
because my back, my back will go or my knees will go or something
Just
like that.
don't break the guitar this time. Make sure.
Well, I've broken a couple of guitars in my time, but I'll do my best.
Be a good boy. All right.
Mhm.
So, a fun fact, actually, ukulele guitar is a Portuguese guitar. It's a
there you
Portuguese
go.
music instrument. Yeah.
We owe
invented
Portugal for everything.
We owe Portugal ukulele guitar. It was invented by Portuguese migrants. And of course, it became a big thing in Hawaii. And
Yes.
now it's a thing on its own. So if you've never stumbled on product management, what do you imagine you would be doing today? I guess you already answered that question in the previous one, right?
Well, yeah, we
you'd
were
be
a
a
popular band, but
rock star.
we weren't popular. But I mean, look, we tried, and we certainly had a small micro level of success. And talking about games, like we got one of our songs on the one of the release launch titles for the Xbox 360 called Project Gotham Racing 4. So actually, our song would go on the soundtrack.
I remember. I think I remember that game. That was
that was pretty cool. I mean, there were like 150 songs on there, so like it wasn't the most, like it wasn't just us and 5 other people or something like that. But it was still like you can load the game up and you'd be playing the game and your song would pop on. Or we got onto a couple of like magazine cover CDs, not the covers themselves, but CDs. Although, fun fact, I don't know if this is the same in Portugal, but there's these kind of rock magazines that you probably don't even know if you have them anymore, but like the rock magazines with the CDs on the front. And you'd always think that the rock magazines would put some kind of quality control behind the CD, like who goes on the CD. As it turns out, you just have to pay them some money to advertise and you get on the CD. I did not know that before then. I know that now. Kind of just shattered my dreams of kind of the meritocracy of rock magazines. It was an eye-opening moment. But what would I be doing? I don't know. I mean, the easy option would be Oculus 2 and spend a lot of time, both me and the kids playing various different games. So, and, I had the Google Cardboard before. I don't know if you've ever seen that, the thing where you put your phone in and that was like my introduction to virtual stuff. But actually getting the Oculus on and even being the lower end, the fact that it was just so immersive and so fun. And I was a bit of a skeptic and it actually really encouraged me to try it. And I really enjoyed it. And yeah, sure, it's just there to make money for Mark Zuckerberg, but it's a pretty fun way to make money for Mark Zuckerberg. So I guess I'll say that for now.
All right. And you're playing games on the PC?
Well, actually, obviously the Oculus, you play games on the Oculus, but on the Mac, as I don't have a PC, don't have Windows anymore, don't have an Xbox or PlayStation anymore. The game that I still play pretty much every day, even for a few minutes, is Doom, like the original Doom.
The original
on the
Doom,
Mac.
yeah.
Not like the original levels for Doom, because I'm sure there's a big ecosystem around Doom.
Yeah.
There's a custom fan-made levels and stuff.
Exactly.
And I just find it like it's almost like playing solitaire for me. Like you can just like load up a level, kill 150 monsters, and then go back to work or something like that. It's a great little mini decompress and have a lot of fun playing it. And also sometimes end up watching videos of other people playing it.
You play it with Oculus? You play Doom with the Oculus?
You can play it with the Oculus, actually. You can. There's like a custom launcher you can get that actually allows you to load Doom WADs, like the levels, up into Oculus. I found it slightly, obviously, Doom's pretty old, and it was just kind of janky a little bit. I think there are probably better games if you wanted to play the 3D immersive stuff on an Oculus. I think that would be better. But I do think that just a good old-fashioned bit of fun, in between doing a bit of work and doing the next bit of work, I sometimes just, on the Mac, will just load up, GZ Doom and put some old level on, shoot a few things, and then go back to work. It's a nice little diversion in between the cut and thrust of day to day.
Absolutely. Always nice to kill some monsters.
Yes.
So, yes, absolutely. So what's the most unusual or interesting thing about you that people cannot find online or without the help of a Russian hacker, at least?
Well, so one thing, and actually when we were in Lisbon a couple of weeks ago, I was with the Ultra VC gang at the end of the week that we'd had there, or the few days that we'd had there. And one of the founders there was a musician, or is a musician, and she's still active. I think maybe you even saw her playing the ukulele and stuff.
Yeah, the Spanish girl.
Yes, like one night we were in one of the many bars in Lisbon, and I got the Facebook, which I barely use anymore, just to talk to my mum. But I got Facebook out and pulled up an old photo of me from 20 years ago playing, to say that I'd just stay being a developer. I was a developer for years, so I could happily go back and crank code out. Although obviously these days with AI, who knows where that's going to go, and like going to sit there and say that I wasn't the best developer, but I was certainly very competent. I think the thing that got me into product in the first place was the fact that I started to get to the limits of my development skill, but I was really still keen to develop, and I was becoming almost naturally, because of maybe the limitations, more interested in what we were building and why we were building and stakeholder management and stuff around it, because I'm not that hardcore. I can't write a Linux kernel or something like that. Like I'm a very sort of, I guess you'd call like a ham and egger, like a Rocky Balboa of development. I can get the job done, but it's not pretty, and I'll probably get punched in the face a few times. So I think,
beautification of code is a problem that nowadays is basically solved with AI, right? You can't just, this is my code, doesn't look good, polish it, right? And AI will polish
even before that, you had like linters and stuff like that would just go through and apply some rules to it. I think, and there was an interesting post on LinkedIn, I think yesterday, from David, what's his face, DHH from Basecamp, the guy that did Shape Up and stuff, but he put a big post out about like the quality that he's seeing from some of this AI generated code, and how, it's really impressive and exciting for someone who doesn't know how to code to be able to turn their ideas into reality. Yeah, pretty much like that. Don't you dare try and maintain those things that way, because it's going to fall apart pretty soon. And, from my personal experience playing with those AI tools, they're really impressive. They're super helpful. But if I didn't know how to code, I would have got to a dead end 25 times by now. So, yeah, be careful what you expect out of these things. But yeah, so the easy thing would be developer. I think the aspirational thing would be I'd love to set up an indoor ski slope within the UK. We've got a couple. I want one and a bit closer to me so that I can go snowboarding all year long.
Yeah, we did speak about that in Lisbon. So one thing I've seen popping up, at least here in Lisbon, obviously we're not a ski nation. We are more of a surf nation than a ski nation, if anything. But yeah, it's one of those indoor ski simulators where you actually have one of this big, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, kind
big
of it's VR,
platform,
right?
and people just, it's actually quite realistic as much as I can tell, because the freedom of movement is quite broad, and people why my lean startup advice would be, why don't you start with maybe one of those small simulators? When I say small, is one of those simulators might cost thousands and thousands of pounds still, but still probably much less capex than one of those.
I can't even imagine the capital expenditure you need to set up a 200
probably
meter long
millions.
indoor fully
Right.
refrigerated snow center.
Exactly.
But other people have done it, so
Yeah.
it is possible. But
It is.
yeah, I mean, obviously the alternative is just to move next to a mountain somewhere and just go and get it for not free, because they charge you for the passes as well. But you know, probably not having to set up the entire thing yourself.
Yeah, I know. I know we're diving already a little bit ahead of the game, because I think this is such an interesting topic. And why do you want to do this? Motivation, of course, sometimes tricks you. It tricks your mind, because if you like ski, it's like the junk addict that wants to start a drug business. Probably not a good idea, right? Because, going to be, maybe hitting your own drugs, and rule number one of, not that I'm in the business, but you don't want to be addicted to your own stuff,
get high
right?
on your own supply, right?
Right. So maybe you just need to spend more time skiing.
Well, so this is the thing, right? Like, and it kind of wraps a little bit back to product management as well, right? Because there are many people out there that will say, well, the best way to get started with it, well, certainly with a startup as an entrepreneur, is to solve your own problem. And obviously, in this case, my own problem is that, well, there's two problems really. One of which, of course, is that the mountains are pretty far away, relatively speaking. The second is that if I want to go on a ski or a snowboard holiday, I've got to take the kids. They don't know how to do it yet. And therefore, if they don't like it, it's going to ruin the week, because they'll just be complaining, and one of us will have to stay back with the kids and the other one will have to go and snowboard on their own. So, yeah, as in me and my wife. It's kind of solving your own problem to an extent. And then you look at the landscape and you look at the competition, certainly in my part of England, and you're like, well, again, there are, so for example, dry slopes. Now, I went onto the dry slope to see if it was a good experience, like a good backup plan. I found it absolutely awful. It was, it was kind of almost like the B2B enterprise version of going to an actual snow slope. And the only justification that I had for going there was that it was a little bit closer than driving all the way up to where the nearest indoor snow center was. So, yeah, you're right. In many ways, you sit there and say, well, this dream, like it requires so much money. There's no lean startup version of creating a 200 meter long indoor snow slope.
There's always a way. There's always a way.
Where there's a will, there's a way. But you're right, like there is a kind of danger that it's not just about solving your own problem, because again, like you think about all the different analogies around what product management is, and whether you're creating a hole, or whether you need a drill, or whether you need a picture, or holographic frames, or whatever. There are ways, you kind of touched on it yourself, there are ways to kind of offer similar sorts of experiences that might be kind of good enough, whether they be those types of contraptions that you were talking about, or whether it's more is dry slopes, or whether it's just that you have to drive further until you get to a thing. Like, there are alternatives. I think, frankly, that my dream, and it's a bit grandiose to call it a dream, but my kind of random brain fart of an idea of creating one of these things, which I'm never going to do because I'm never going to have enough money to do it. I'll never be able to persuade anyone to give me the money to do it because there's so much money required. There are alternatives, and I think it would be very much a kind of getting higher on your own supply, and I'd probably be the only one using it. So, yeah, I don't think you should, but it's an interesting one, actually, talk about what I don't think you should do. Like, one of the things which I've often pondered, and I had a bit of a back and forth with Shreyas on this on Twitter a little while ago, quite a while ago now, because I don't use Twitter anymore, but this idea that, like, going to work on something that you're super passionate about, whatever that thing is, not necessarily as a founder, but maybe as a product person, like a product leader or a product manager, going into a company in a space like climate or health or mental health or whatever it is, something that you really care about, really hits one of your values. Like, from my initial naive perspective, you sit there and go, well, that's got to be like the dream, right? Like just working on something that you care about so much.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's what founders do all the time. But at the same time, if you're not the founder and you go and work for something or somewhere that is in a space that you care about really quite a lot, but they're not solving that in quite the way that you would want to solve it, or you feel that they're kind of holding back, or that they're making bad strategic decisions, or any of those things, it can actually make you feel worse than if you were just working for yet another payments company or fintech or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're sitting there saying, well, I really care about this thing, and I don't believe that the company's doing the things the way that we could be doing them. So I think that is an interesting kind of maybe slight divergence between, solve your own problem, do what you care about is great for a founder because you get to make all the big calls and you sort of set the direction of the company. If you're going to go and do that as an employee, again, just be careful what you wish for, and you may be better off just working for something that is kind of neutral. Like there are companies that I wouldn't work for, like types of company.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't work for a gambling company. I wouldn't work for a cigarette company, that type of company, or a missile, weapons company or something like that. There are definitely bad companies or industries that I wouldn't touch. There's obviously lots of neutral companies as well. And if you're not a founder, like maybe you get a little bit more joy out of working for some of those, because at least you're not going to get kind of personally involved in every single potential failing of the product and not have all of the power you need to fix it. Interesting
Totally
thoughts.
see what you're saying. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey into product. And could you share a bit about how you get started, or how you got started back then, and some of the key milestones that shaped your career? So you were telling me you were a developer, you felt that you were hitting this wall, which is, your Peter's limit, so to say, and someone promoted you to product management, or you found that you have to promote yourself to product. What was the insight here?
Yeah, so I mean, the short version, and without wishing to bore you too much, I'm sure I've probably told you before, but so I actually spent a long time, basically 19 years in a big corporate, a big global multinational corporate, big market research firm. There was effectively, certainly when I joined, a service company, and there was no product there at all, and I was doing effectively project-based web development and associated activities, including sort of data and databases and analyses and stuff like that. Obviously, as time moved on and everything went online, there was more of a push to, start to standardize stuff as well as best they could. But along that journey, I moved into sort of tech leadership, running teams, managing teams, getting involved in sort of top level stakeholder alignment and sort of helping with strategy and stuff like that. And then I took, which kind of maybe one of the milestones, took a global role working for the global, effectively almost like a standardization team, where they wanted to bring in the same basic this is a company that had grown up over so many years that they had like different versions of different things everywhere. In every single country, we had offices everywhere. Every single office, every single country had kind of been acquired into a federation, and they all use different stuff. So we started working a lot on standardization of tools, standardization of offerings as well, and starting to work on trying to basically digitize as much as possible, remove human effort, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Working on some sort of proto-AI stuff as well, which I kind of look back on and sort of smile about now, because obviously sort of moved on so much since then. But, we work on some pretty cool stuff around sort of face detection and emotion detection and things like that, and sort of voice detection and detecting sentiment from voice and all these things. It's all very exciting stuff. We then got bought by a huge private equity firm called KKR, one of the biggest,
Mm-hmm.
and they decided to digitally transform the company. And they brought in a lot of external people that had kind of come from different backgrounds to try and shake the place up. And of course, you start to get exposed to a bunch of things and different ideas, and they start putting different books on your desk and stuff like that. And there were two things that I realized. One of which was that many of these things were what I was already been doing and what I'd been doing for months or years, depending on the specifics. But second of all, that ultimately, maybe this huge, big multinational, with offices everywhere and big entrenched user bases and a lot of kind of cultural change that needed to be done, like maybe that wasn't the best place to be doing some of the cool stuff that I now had my eyes opened up to. So that was when I basically promoted myself, or moved myself from kind of the 19-year in one place, gold watch, here we go till retirement type job, into, well, let's go and start working for some startups. So I then went for a few startups at different industries, like originally in basically the same industry, then moving into different types of industry as well. Started the podcast alongside that as well, as you know, which obviously opened my network up and opened my eyes to so many different things. And
So
then
you started the podcasts while you were still at this consulting.
yes, no, so the podcast was started in 2020, which was kind of a year after I left the big multinational. And the podcast for me was really just a way, I mean, it was a kind of a COVID project in some way, kind of coming out of one of the lockdowns. And I'm thinking, well, I need to, my world feels so small. And the only people that I get to talk to about product stuff are the people that I know in my team. Like really, yeah, sure, you go to the odd meetup, but of course the meetups had all been cancelled as well. Kind of just had this feeling that my network was small. I could only talk to my own people, and they were basically in the same boat as me. Like, yeah, sure, nothing wrong with the boat, but like it was a boat where everyone was struggling or flourishing with the same issues that I was. So I wanted to kind of just get out there and get some different perspectives and widen my perspective. So yeah, there was no kind of financial or lead generation or business motive for that at the time. It was very much just a hobby on the side. Because nowadays people go to me, oh, well, now you're a consultant. Must be really handy to have a podcast. Like, do you use it for lead gen? Do you have like a content plan to get people on so you can sell them stuff? It's like, no, it still remains exactly what it was to start with. A nice way for me to have a chat, expand my horizons, have conversations that I wouldn't normally have. But obviously, as part of having those conversations, really expanded not my primary knowledge, like, I've got to stand on the work that I've done myself, but also my kind of secondary knowledge that I can use to kind of bolster the primary knowledge. I got to a couple of years, 2 years ago now, when I decided to go consulting, and I'd kind of come out the back of one job, had a bit of money in the bank. I'm thinking, well, what now? Do I just it's like it's easy, but like, do I just go and get another job and do the same thing again, or do I try to use this wider perspective that I've now developed to try and help more people? And I thought, well, look, I've got enough money in the bank for a few months, so let's go and try and do that and see if I can make a success of it. If I'd be any good at it. 2 years on, I'm still doing the same thing.
That's what led you to the eventually founding One Night Consulting.
Yeah, so I mean, One Night Consulting is like it's funny because it's very much like, if you think about it, it's basically just a company name that's made up off the back of the podcast name. It's just you trying to use the same brand for any kind of awareness at all. The first thing I found.
Yeah, so, you were telling me this the other day, but please go ahead.
And quick break. Did you know this year's Productized conference is a big one? We're celebrating our 10th edition. For a decade, we've been bringing product managers, designers, and innovators together in Lisbon for top-tier insights, interactive workshops, and invaluable networking. This year, it's bigger and better than ever with world-class speakers and special anniversary celebrations. Don't miss your chance to be part of it October 16th to 17th in Lisbon.
Join us for the big celebration. Tickets are now available at www.productized.co. We hope to meet you there.
Well, the first thing that I found was that, of course, I'm naively sitting there thinking that in any way that the sort of the podcast reputation, whatever it was that I had, was in any way going to sort of set me up for financial and business success. And I can't say that it hasn't helped at all, but like, I don't think that it's been as helpful as maybe I naively thought it was in the first place. I've had to put the work in probably just as much as anyone else, just with the benefit of a slightly larger network of people that primarily don't need to buy the sorts of things that I offer, because there are a lot of ICs and a lot of people in different sorts of companies that have kind of followed me for the podcast, or they followed me for some meme that I've put up on LinkedIn or something like that. They're not my buyers. But then again, with LinkedIn, as with the podcast, I've never really considered it like a lead generation, let's milk it type thing. I've always been interested in real connections and having good conversations with people. So it kind of saddens me a little these days when people are kind of going on LinkedIn and say, oh, you got to just have one topic, and you got to just put these number of posts out a week, and they've got to follow this format. You've got to do this type of video now, and you've got to have this, and you've got to have that, and like a lead generation magnet thing that you put on your front page that you can guide people to. It's like, yeah, sure, I understand that people are doing that, and I understand that in many cases they're getting benefits out of that. But I always wanted to LinkedIn, and obviously the podcast as well, to be kind of more of a community. Like, I wanted to get and have good conversations and just find people and talk to people and be inspired by people. Yeah, it kind of saddens me a little bit how the LinkedIn stuff and other socials going, but you keep banging away at it anyway.
Yes, but you can choose your own narrative.
You can choose what you do. The problem is that some of these platforms now are kind of enforcing types of choice, or rather prioritizing and promoting certain types of choice. Like, yeah, you can choose, if you so desire, to stay on Twitter or X and swim in that cesspool for as long as you want, and that's cool. But if you don't pay for it, you're not going to get anything out of it because they've massively overweighted that. You can choose to make certain types of content within LinkedIn, but if you don't basically either pay for it or if you don't follow basically do certain types of content, then again, you're going to get dragged down. Like it's kind of almost funny, this idea that like there's almost like almost like a moral thing. Like, yeah, I can be as moral as I want, but if I'm not getting anything out, if I'm not getting visibility out of it, then like it kind of feels a little bit sad. My vision, and it's not much of a vision, but my vision for any kind of social platform is, you connect with people, you post stuff, and the people that have chosen to follow you see it, and vice versa. But this algorithmic stuff is just, I understand why they do it, because they want to get people on the site and serve them as many ads as possible. And if I was a product manager for LinkedIn, I'd probably do much the same, because I've been told to get those metrics up. It feels to me that it just brings us further apart, because everything just becomes so performative. Like, you're going on these sites and you use these sites just as much as I do. You're going on these sites and everyone's just like, it has become almost like Instagram. Like, you go out, you take 150 photos of you and your family one day, and you put the one good one up because that's the one that you want to remember, not the other ones where everyone's crying and shouting. It's kind of like that, but in business form. You just put the stuff up that you want people to see, or that if you're going to be job hunting, that you want people to think that you think, rather than actually being honest and having good conversations and being open and clear with people. But yeah, it's a shame, but you've got to operate within the system, right?
So let's start maybe with one of the areas of expertise that I see you posting more about, which is scaling B2B and SaaS businesses and fostering effective product leadership as well. So these are challenges that you've tackled for a number of companies, and from your perspective, and also some of the takeaways you take from your own podcast as well. What are the biggest mistakes scaling B2B SaaS companies make when they define their product strategies, or within their product strategies? I would frame it this way.
Well, of course, you're being very generous and assuming that in some cases that they have product strategies. And I think actually that's probably one of the mistakes. Like, well, you could argue about whether it's a mistake or not, though, as well. Like, because, and I was chatting to someone about this the other day who works for a company where he's very much just being expected to just build the next thing, sales-led motion, selling to big enterprises. They don't have that many customers a year, and they're sitting there basically like their strategy, whether explicitly or implicitly, is just to build the next thing. Like, they don't have any kind of real understanding of like an ideal customer profile or target segments. They've not defined their playing field that they're going to play on. The playing field is just a bunch of disconnected companies that do vaguely similar things with a certain type of data. Now, maybe that's okay. Like I said to him at the time, like there's kind of two ways that the company needs to go in that sort of situation. And this is a choice I think a lot of B2B companies almost default into, which is a lot of B2B companies kind of don't choose either of them, and they kind of just go down the middle and never really seem to satisfy anyone. But you've got two choices. One of which is you do that work. You sit there and you sort of define some of your strategic kind of parameters. You define the markets that you're going to play in, your ideal customers, the problems that you're going to solve for these people, the sizes of the markets, the differentiation that you're going to bring, the reason that you deserve to win in that market in the first place, and the product that's going to help you do it. Like, that's all cool. That's all, that's the same from all these books. That's kind of classic advice in many ways. But if you don't do that, and if you are just going to be kind of reactive and just build, be very sales led and just build the next thing and go where the deals are, you have to get really, really good at executing and turning these things around really, really quickly. Otherwise, you're always going to have more requests than you're going to have time to do them. Like, it's easier to promise something than it is to build the thing that you promised. I think that the kind of big mistake that a lot of companies get into is that they think that they're product companies, or that they're going to get the benefits of being like, whether or not you're a product company is neither here nor there. And to some extent, like, who cares to some extent? I mean, I care, but like, it doesn't matter if you decide not to be a product company. If you decide to be a services company, or a product powered services or services powered product, whatever you wanted to, wherever on the spectrum you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem that these companies get into is that they want the benefits of being a product company, as scalable unit economics and being able to sell the same thing, not having to build all this custom stuff, being able to kind of offer stuff for cheaper and price it cheaper so that people can buy it because they're getting a standardized thing. they want all of that stuff, but they're unwilling to make the choices that are needed, to actually make that model work. So they end up basically doing loads of custom work for people, but on a kind of a product budget, which means that they don't have the kind of infrastructure, they don't have the resources to actually build all of these things. But rather than sort of take a step back and say, oh, actually, maybe if we just kind of reduced a little bit, we can still sell to whoever, but at least we can kind of focus what we build on a certain set of use cases that we've decided up front, not that we've been told to decide by the next person that we spoke to. The idealistic view is that if they just did that, then they would be able to prioritize more effectively, and that they'd have more success and actually build a product that was good rather than something that was just okay enough to be bought by a bunch of people. But once they buy it, they either churn or eventually you kind of just keep complaining about it, and you end up coming to do like emergency fixes and put stuff around it simply because you never quite built the product that anyone wanted. So I think that's a big mistake for B2B companies, and it's not something. Like if I talk to someone from a company, B2B SaaS company, and they say that they're in that kind of situation, it's not often a surprise.
And how do you approach building this strategic product leadership in organizations that like it? Because usually from what you're saying, and I also see that most of the times that the difficulty is doing those hard choices. And that's because leadership is not willing to do those choices, willing to take the hard decisions that are needed to go into a more product-led environment. So when you work with these companies, do you see the effectiveness of your work, and how do you make it effective if sometimes the leadership is still not there? Which is a common complaint that I get from product managers in B2B is that this middle level product managers, they understand, but then they complain, oh yeah, but leadership doesn't get it, and that this ends up at the end of the day being a sales driven organization.
So I think first of all, let's just put it on the table. There are always going to be, or there are going to be some leaders out there of some companies that are never going to get it. Like all of their instincts are just in a different ballpark. And like I say to people sometimes when I'm working with them or when I'm advising, whatever, they'll kind of tell that kind of story, and I'll be like, well, look, end of the day, like you're not going to be able to go up to this person and say, oh well, blah blah blah, book this, blah blah blah, book that, and we just have to do these things like the book because someone who wrote a book said so. Like that doesn't. I'm pretty sure that's never. I don't think that's ever really kind of impressed or persuaded anyone. Now there are some people out there, founders, leaders, that almost just think this is how companies work. Like they just, no matter how big the company gets, whatever level of scale it gets to, they just think this is how a tech company works. So they just build the things that they come in, and they just have to do their best and have to be nimble and fast and pivot or whatever because they heard that from someone else or whatever. And again, maybe that's actually the only way to win in your market. Like I'm certainly aware of people that work in very small, kind of unpromising in many ways markets that maybe don't have huge addressable market size, maybe don't have that many competitors, and they only have maybe a handful of really big customers that they need to kind of keep them going. You're automatically going to get dragged into being more of a sort of build what they say mindset, because you're almost becoming to some extent like a dev shop for them to do the things that they can't do, with the slight benefits that you've got a few other customers that maybe want similar stuff or hopefully similar stuff. The simple question, well, to go back to your question, like, how's it been with the people that I've worked with or for? It's been a mixed bag. I mean, I'm going to be completely honest, like not everyone will drink the Kool-Aid. And to some extent, my goal isn't to get them to drink the Kool-Aid. I don't want people to drink the Kool-Aid, get a sugar rush, and then crash down later. Like I want to basically create sustainable change that means that after I'm gone, for example, that people aren't just going to snap back straight to where they were before. So if I think about like some of the approaches that I've taken or tried to take with different companies, a lot of it's around, well, first of all, whatever we do, let's just work out like whether we believe as a company and as a leadership team that we even have a problem, like, and what we believe that problem is. Like most of the time when you're going into a company, certainly as a consultant, there's some problem that they want solved. Like either the product team isn't performing as well as it could do, or the product growth has slowed down a little bit, or there's just kind of miscommunication or misalignment between teams and no one knows what's going on. There's maybe no strategy at all. Now, each of those kind of have different solutions, but at the same time, just going in and getting people like the main players, the leaders of the company, to at least even admit that there's a problem, even if they don't agree on the solution. They have to admit that there's a problem, because if you can't get them to admit that there's a problem and what that problem is, then they're never going to agree on the solution, because they'll be spending all their time complaining that you're wasting time solving something that's not a problem. So you need to get alignment on what that problem is. I was chatting to someone the other day around this idea of like, well, everyone in the leadership team just thinks that the company should be going in a different direction. So, okay, well, if you're in that sort of situation, then I don't have like Johnny Zapp from whatever FANG company, like the most amazing product manager in the world, comes into that situation, isn't going to make a difference, because the leadership are all pulling in different directions. And that's where you start to get these frameworks like EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which are supposed to try and bring leadership teams together so that they can at least be pulling in the same directions themselves. Because if they're not pulling in the same directions, then the company doesn't have a chance, unless like all of the directions accidentally cancel each other out, like sort of quantum mechanics or something like that. So so there's this idea of like, well, look, there has to be alignment at the top, both on the direction and also acceptance of the problems that you have, whether it be slowed down growth or stale product that isn't developing in the ways that they think it should, or unhappy customers, or teams shouting at each other all the time. Whatever the problem is, you need to get that alignment. Then you need to work with the teams. You work with the teams to try and get them together. I think it's surprising for me, and maybe it shouldn't be that surprising, but it's surprising to me, like when you walk into a company and you see that there are teams that don't talk to each other, barely. Like I walked into one company, there was a product team and there was a product marketing team, and I was introduced to the product marketing team with the product team, and it was very clear that neither of those teams had really ever spoken to each other before.
Different products or
same product? It's just like there was just such a transactional relationship between them that they kind of just sent them a message whenever anything was done. There was no collaboration between them. I've worked with other companies where there's like a big back and forth around like, our specifications from the product team aren't good enough, and therefore we can't build good products. And like you sit there and you look and it's like, well, the specification, like if you're hanging everything off of whether you've written the best specifications, like there's a big gap there. And this is something that comes up from time to time, this idea that the thing that we're missing is the best specifications in the right template. So no. Take a step back. You need to collaborate more. You need to be talking more. You need to actually work together as a team to solve these problems and understand what you're solving them for, rather than just trying to follow a recipe that someone else wrote and then it all goes wrong because, copy and paste error or something like that. Like we're supposed to be working together as teams. So trying to understand where the gaps are between the teams and who's not working well with whomever. Like sales and product is always a big problem as well, as you obviously know. That's why I do the course that I do with my friend Saeed from Canada, where we basically we identified this problem. We spoke to a bunch of B2B product people saying like, well, we just like sales is a horrendous problem because they're just always telling us what to build and we never get a chance to have any kind of roadmap at all or any of the things that, kind of common complaints. And again, the amount of companies you walk into where you're like, well, the sales team and the product team, they just don't talk. The only time they talk is when the sales team escalates something to the CEO because the product team said that they couldn't do it. And then obviously then it all becomes just acrimonious and fighting. A lot of what I see out there, a lot of the problems that I see out there tend to be around alignment, collaboration. There's obviously strategy as well. Like a lot of companies don't really have much of a strategy. That's another thing that you can obviously work on with the leadership team. And again, with varying levels of success, because frankly, and I can't remember who it was that said this, so I apologize to whoever said it, but there's this idea that many leaders out there, like big top level leaders, they kind of hate having to make choices because making a choice takes options off the table, and they just see a world of opportunity in front of them. Whereas strategy is all about making choices. So actually getting people to sit down and talk to them about, really openly and honestly, like what are the things that we're good at? What are the things that we're not good at? What are the things that are dragging us down? What are the things that if we do more of these things that we're actually going to be able to move forward and win? Like having those types of discussions without the answer being everything. Again, some founders are just never going to get it. Some are much more on the same page with that. And there's obviously a big spectrum in between. So bit of a ramble there, but like those are some of the things that I've seen in companies, and when you go in and sort of some of the things that you try to do to try and get people together around the problems, get them to acknowledge the problems, suggest some solutions. But also another thing is just making sure that you can prove to some extent via whatever small step that you can take, this is going to get us better results than what we were doing before. Like, obviously you can't just sit there and blow it all up. Like, you need to start making little steps.
And can you share any success story where a company implemented some of these recommendations and saw any kind of change or transformation?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one example that always crops up is, or kind of sort of comes to mind, is company. Obviously, I have to change the names to protect the guilty, but I was working with one company that had a big problem with the amount of time that it took to get new customers onto the system. Like, there was no product-led growth, self-onboarding, and it was a very white glove onboarding. And they were getting to the point where they could basically, they almost couldn't sell. Like, we're actually making it so that they couldn't sell, or they got to the scale where they couldn't sell as quickly as they wanted to, because they wouldn't be able to get people onto the platform within a time that they would find acceptable. So yeah, you sit there and think, well, the obvious solution to that is let's automate some stuff. But it had just never happened before. And like, just going in there and investigating the kind of the cost of doing these things, the effort, the steps that were involved, the teams that were involved, and obviously all these processes have just grown up organically over time. So you just sit there and say, okay, well, look, again, we're not going to fix this all like that. And we can't just click our fingers and it's all gone, because there's a lot of stuff to unpick here. But working with the teams to kind of map out the processes, work out the sort of the lowest risk, highest reward type things that we could start to swap out, and then just swapping more and more stuff out to kind of get that onboarding time down, so that you're in a situation where you can actually start to accelerate the sales pipeline again. Again, that's a very specific example that I'm thinking of. And but I can also think of times where, you know, you go to people and you say, well, look, this is the thing that I would do to meet this new goal of yours, your revenue goal or whatever. Like, these are some options. They're fairly, new price tiers or different kind of different ways to package the product that could maybe open up new markets and stuff. They sit there and say, well, no, that's too traditional. I don't like that kind of thinking. We want to disrupt, etc., etc. Here's my strategy. We should do this instead. And, you know, you sit there and say, okay, well, cool. Like, maybe that's going to work. I'm not going to say that it's not. However, at the same time, like, that's kind of, you sit there and think, well, did that make my work irrelevant? And then you sit there and think, well, no, because I think it was a book called Flawless Consulting. I don't know if you've seen that book. It's a kind of a classic consulting book. One of the things that the guy in that book says is that even if a consultant goes into a company and the company doesn't take any of that consultant's advice, they don't do any of the things that consultant said, and they just carry on exactly as they were before, and the consultant walks away having not changed anything, it's easy for the consultant in that sort of situation to feel that they've kind of failed. But you could argue to an extent they kind of have, in a way. But at the same time, some problems, I can't make a company do something, right? That you're in a sort of situation, and it's like with coaching as well. When you coach people, you can't make people do the things that you discuss with them. All you can do is give your best recommendations based on the best evidence to try and help them understand the benefits of doing certain things. Like, you don't work for the company. You don't have a stake in the company. You're naturally time limited and, to some extent distrusted by the leadership, because you're a hired gun. You're someone that comes, you come in to do a thing.
Usually you are hired by someone and several leadership, and one of them hires you, and then you have to buy yourself into the rest.
Yeah,
right?
because the rest of them all hate you. They all hate the fact that you're there. So, and that's fine.
They hate you for good reasons, but a lot of times they also hate you for pure egotistical and agenda reasons. So this guy hires you to do my best to make you look a loser, and so whoever hire you also looks like a loser.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to sit there and say that every single engagement that I've ever had has been successful as a consultant, but I don't think any consultant would say that. And every single consultant or coach that I speak to out there all has their horror stories. And I remember once speaking to, I think he said it on the podcast, so hopefully it's okay to share. No, I won't name him. There we go, just in case. But there was one very well-known consultant that I spoke to who was like, he went into work with a company, and within like 2 days, he's like, look, I will let you out of your contract now if you never tell anyone that I ever worked for you before. Like, it was that bad of an environment, or that impossible of a challenge, that even with this person's incredible skill set, the answer was just like, I can't do anything. I've got to leave. And if you say that I didn't work here, that's fine. So, like, there are obviously those kind of horror stories. But then, there are also ones where you make some progress. There are some
of
where you
course.
make none progress. For me, I think just the most important thing, and, it's maybe uncomfortable for some people that maybe if they've come from a very high performing background where they want to, do the best and kind of save companies and all of these things, is like, as long as you've done your best, as long as it's almost the same as that book, like as long as you've done your best, as long as I can go in there and say, look, I did my best. I did the things that I said that I was going to do. I gave the advice based on the best of my knowledge that would deliver these results. We proved out what we could. If the leadership of the company is like, well, actually, we want to go a different way now, you've got to just accept that and move on, because again, you're the hired hand. You can't make them do anything.
So let's just switch gears a bit, and I'd love to touch something we have promised in the beginning of the podcast, which is developing future-ready product strategies and towards more of innovation landscape. So in today's fast-changing tech landscape, companies must anticipate trends, or at least they must be ready for ever disrupting or being ready to be disrupted, really, right, to remain competitive. From your experience, how can organizations ensure that their product strategies are prepared for the future? And I've been having this conversation with lots of people in podcasts, and things go from, I should give freedom, go the Google style, which you give 20% time to your teams to work on, disruptive, out of view territory stuff, all the way to the YouTube strategy, which is, we have this silos of time bounded that you give teams also to work either on more disruptive and then incrementally less disruptive stuff. Do you have any approach to identify and incorporate emerging trends in the product roadmap? And of course, a lot of this is, the whole bandwagon, Web3 or AI, whatever it is. But do you have any thesis on this?
So I think, and it's going to sound very old-fashioned maybe, but I think that the best way to keep on top of what's important for your product is to speak to the people that use it. And not that I'm expecting those people to design my product for me, because of course not. It's very difficult unless you're lucky enough to be selling a product to product managers or product designers. It's very unlikely that they're going to have, or engineers, it's very unlikely that they're going to have like a full understanding of the art of the possible and all of the things that you could do. And of course, developers and data scientists and all of that, they need to keep up with trends. They need to keep up with new papers or new technologies that are being delivered, because those things, there's people building stuff all the time, right? But, things like Web3 are a fantastic example. Yeah, like whatever you think the pros and cons of that technology are, I've still yet to see many use cases come out of it that are actually compelling that go into most products. Like, yeah, sure, you've got the Bitcoin surging at the moment. Brilliant. I wish I'd bought some back in the old days when I tried and the bank said that I couldn't, and then I didn't try again. If I had bought them then, I'd have had loads of money now. But, there's not like a compelling use case for NFTs, for example. Like everyone was sitting there talking. Well, actually, rewinding even years before that, I remember when I was at the market research company, there was a big push for things. Remember when things like Second Life came out and all these kind of virtual worlds, and there was this massive rush by all of these different companies, banks and car companies, to set up like virtual showrooms and virtual banks and these things, because apparently that was
metaverse, right?
Kind of a proto-metaverse in a way, right?
Yeah, proto-metaverse. You're right.
I mean, Second Life's still around now. I think it's being used for much more salacious things these days, based on an article that I read. Like back in the day, it was supposed to be like the next big thing, and of course it wasn't. And then everyone stopped investing in that, and it was all gone again. But yeah, it doesn't mean that it wasn't worth trying. So maybe that could have been some of that 20% time that you're talking about. But the simple fact is that the users that we have, or our customers, obviously in the B2B context, are the ones that know best, not what technologies exist, but what problems that they have and the things that they need to be solved. Like, let's boil it straight back down to the bare basics of product management. What problem do our customers have that they need solving so much that they're prepared to pay money for it, and that you can solve for them in a way, however you solve it? Like, this is why I don't like the concept of AI product managers, as an example. People are out there now calling themselves AI product managers, and I'm sure that to some extent that's because they just want to get a bit more money in the next pay packet, or just sort of position themselves for the next job. But like, if your solution to everything is AI, like if that's your starting point, then you're going to miss things that aren't AI. Like, it goes back, for example, you mentioned earlier about beautifying code. Like, you don't need AI to beautify code. There've been tools that beautify code for years, decades, and that's fine. Use the tool that's fit for the job and does it in the most appropriate and accessible and scalable way. That doesn't mean don't use AI, but it also doesn't mean start with AI. Like, just start with the problem. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? What do these people need? What things do they keep coming up with? And then you can go away. You can work with your teams to try to match those needs to the to either new technologies that come in. You can run things like hackathons, which, some people have a bit of a bad feeling about, like, oh, hackathons, waste of time, whatever. But like, there is something to be said for playing with technology, but playing with technology not for the sake of playing with technology, but because you know that there's a problem that needs to be solved that you don't know how to solve yet. So what can we do through that lens, getting teams together, either giving them, again, hackathons or percentage of their time or breaks in between, if you're using sprints or whatever, like every 8th sprint or something like that is a fun sprint or whatever you want to call it. But also just getting teams both together as cross-functional teams, of course, because they can then start to bat ideas around, and you can do things like design sprints and things like that. Try and sort of come up with ideas, or you can do ideation exercises, stupid stuff like crazy eights and things like that, where you can just start to come up with the stupidest ideas possible and then start to whittle that down. But you don't want to spend all your time doing that, because then you're in a situation where you never build anything. There has to be room for ideas to grow, but those ideas all have to be based on the fundamental desires and needs of the people that you're eventually going to be selling this stuff to. If you just start with technology, which I know that some people do, I mean, you might be lucky, but I think a lot of the time you just end up building something that no one wants.
And how do you balance taking some of these calculated risks on innovation while ensuring alignment with the company's core vision?
Well, that's more of a kind of a portfolio management point at that. At that point, right, you're sort of sitting there saying, well, how much of our time do we want to spend in each of these buckets? A lot of that obviously depends on the size and the maturity of the company. So, for example, I've worked with larger companies that may be a bit more established, where they've got various different bits of product at different ends of the kind of explore, exploit life cycle, the kind of the portfolio life cycle, where some stuff's just a cash cow that they just keep milking and they just have to keep the lights on. Doesn't really need to change too much. But at the same time, if it goes down, it's going to be a huge problem. Probably going to get disrupted at some point in the future. But until then, they just need to allocate X% of their time to that. I think, portfolio management and saying that we're going to sit there and we're going to give 20% of our time to new stuff and 50% of our time to stuff that's already emerging, and then whatever's left, like 30% of our time to the cash cow that just needs to be kept running. I mean, obviously the problem with things like that is that you end up with people working on the thing that just needs to be kept running, starting to feel a little bit bored, because they're in a team that's working on stuff that, basically isn't going to change too much. So that is a big problem with that type of approach. But you can always start to sort of rotate people through, or even just give them little sort of hackathons and things like that to try and come up with things that maybe start to future-proof or spin off things from that more established technology. But I think ultimately, from a portfolio management perspective, if you're sitting there with the leadership team and you're just saying, like, look, this is our portfolio, this is how much money we're making from different parts of our portfolio, this is the kind of the net revenue or whatever from the profit that we're making from each of these things, this is what we believe will happen if we invest this amount of money or this amount of our time in this area. This is what will happen if we don't do anything at all. Because that's always an interesting one as well. Like, I've spoken to some people that are like, but my question will literally be, if you did nothing to this product for a year, what would happen? Would you, would it all come crashing down?
Right.
Would it be fine? Would you still be able to sell just as well as you were before? And in some cases, the answer is, we'll just keep selling it. So, wow, well, okay, fine. Well, if you're in that sort of situation, then you've got to start really thinking about the kind of the return on investment on having like a 500,000 million pound sort of worth of team supporting this thing, when actually it's kind of just fine. Now, obviously, innovator's dilemma style, it's not always going to be fine, but, trying to work out like what happens in the kind of the high, medium and low or dead kind of lines. Like, if we invest this amount of money, we expect to get this result back, and for the different projections, and try and use that to balance out how much percentage of your time you want to spend on different things. But it's tricky because obviously a lot of times people have pet projects, they have pet things that they want to work on, or, you know, the company could be set up around one thing, but there's a new thing that needs to be built, but there's so much demand on the old cash cow that, you know, it becomes hard then without either scaling up the teams or deliberately saying no to things. It becomes hard because people start getting sort of dragged back into the big thing when there's like some new big customer demand or something like that.
And it's so hard to protect people from being dragged to the big wave, right? It's so hard.
Yes, there's just the gravity around it, right?
Yeah,
like,
it's like the
so.
black hole, right? It's just the gargantuan black hole that is forcing everything at the center of the galaxy. It's just consuming every, you know, atom of mass and attracting it. And is there any framework or mental model that you like to use in your daily practice, either professionally or even for personal objectives? Is there anything that you are really fond of, that you have one of these personal hacks that I'm very much using this mental model in my life, and I've seen it work so many times. I'm so happy that I'm using it.
Well, that's an interesting one. Eat lots of vegetables and go and do a run outside. But I guess if we're talking about works, and sort of still talking about product related stuff as well, I think, and this is something actually that kind of affects me, obviously working with lots of different companies at the same time, or talking to lots of different companies at the same time. Context switching is very tricky. And like, I remember, for example, at one point I had 2 fractional roles at the same time, and I was obviously working 2 days a week with each company. One of which was a bit larger than the other company, but I was hiring or helping to hire a CTO for the smaller company and a sort of a head of engineering for the second company. And because of difference in size of the companies, they were effectively kind of the same scope role in many ways. And sort of bouncing between, and sometimes on the same day, calls between different people and desperately trying to, you know, almost remember or hopefully not say the wrong thing to the wrong person, or talk about the wrong product or the wrong company to the wrong person.
Yeah, it's like having two mistresses at the same time, right? You have to.
Yeah, it reminds me of Superman 4 when he's going on a date with Lois Lane and the other woman that he was dating, but he's going on a date with one of them as Clark Kent and one of them as Superman, and he keeps like stepping out and coming back as the other person, and then stepping out and coming back as the other person. It was ridiculous. But even that wasn't the worst part about Superman 4, obviously. But I think that one of the things that I like to do, and, you know, with varying levels of success, but I think it's helpful for both work and life, is to try to really, I mean, it's cliche, but focus. Like, try to avoid as much context switching as possible, block out time to work on certain things. Now, that's going to be hard to protect sometimes because, you know, life happens. But at the same time, I've had situations in the past where I basically just thought, I'll just switch. I'll just manage it. I'll just kind of go up and down and around and do all of the things. And you just end up at the end of the day exhausted. And also you realize you haven't done half the things because, you know, there's just so much going on, and there was no structure around it. So I don't think I'd necessarily call it a particular framework or mental model as such, but desperately trying to protect as much of your time in a block as you can around certain tasks or initiatives versus bouncing around. And if we take this back to building products as well, like I mean, you think about things like Scrum and sprint goals and stuff like that. It's the same type of thing, right? Like within a couple of weeks in Scrum, you're supposed to really be just working on one thing. Like that's all, broadly speaking. Whereas a lot of people, and what I've seen in the past as well, is where you get like, they say, well, what's the sprint goal? It's like, okay, well, we've pulled these 20 tickets in. These 4 are about this thing. These 3 are about this thing. And you got to draw a circle. Okay, so our 4 sprint goals are now this lot, this lot, this lot, and this lot. And you're sitting there saying, well, okay, well, there's no coherence at all. They're just a bunch of things that we pulled out of the backlog that we've now said are our goals. So sort of defining the goals, for example, for the day or for the quarter or whatever up front, rather than just sort of YOLOing it and trying to work it out as you go. Sometimes, again, easier said than done, but I've found to my cost that it's, certainly to my mental cost, that it's quite hard to just keep bouncing between things. And I think that's something that we should try and avoid as much as possible, both for our own personal work, but also obviously for the stuff that we do, the initiatives that we actually work on in a product organization as well.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jason. It has been an incredible, insightful conversation. We have, I think, been deep into the whole business-to-business SaaS and the very complex topic, as you would imagine. But before just wrapping up, I'd like to What's the name of this course that you were speaking about on the sales product tension?
Yes, so it's called Working with Sales. So it's very imaginatively
Working with
titled.
sales, and this is a joint course with
My friend Saeed Khan. Many of
Saeed
you may
Khan.
know Saeed from
Yeah,
Toronto.
Saeed. But yeah, we were in London a few. It's still in London, right?
No, he's in Toronto
In Toronto,
in Canada.
Okay, I think we met in London a few years ago. So, and when is the next edition coming in?
Well, so actually we're doing two. So previously, it's been on Maven, and previously it's been like once every month or once every couple of months or something like that. But we're also offering a self-paced version now as well, where people can just download it or get the materials and not have to have the kind of the fixed cohort dates, because some people were maybe not able to make the dates or the kind of the office hours sessions and such. But we're running a new kind of live mixed session on the 20th of January, about a month from now. But the self-study version, the self-paced, get the materials and do it yourself, is going to be available as of the beginning of January as well. So,
all right,
many options.
Many options. Do you have any upcoming projects or initiatives you're involved?
Do I have any
that you'd like to share with us?
Well, so I mean, it depends on what size of initiative you're talking. So I'm doing a live session with Maya Voye of the Go-to-Market Strategist book next week on a Christmas fireside chat, but I'm assuming that this podcast will go out after that, so probably a bit late for that, but maybe check it out on YouTube. Have some fun and some chats about all things go-to-market. Ultra VC, who you mentioned earlier, they've just opened up their next cohort for their accelerator. So if anyone's listening to this and they have a startup in the kind of tech for good space, then that could be something worth looking at, because they have places available in their accelerator, a little bit of funding, lots of support. So that could be helpful. And yeah, just in general, for me, a lot of the next few months is going to be the same. I say the same old, but the kind of the consultant's life, right? Of working, finding people to talk to, talking to them, giving out a lot of free advice, because of course that's part of the job, but also trying to do my best to be useful to them in a way that's also financially sustainable for me. So I'm doing a lot of that type of work. Doing a few talks as well. Got one in Berlin in January, talking about the predictions for product management in 2025. Doing a conference in Amsterdam in March as well. So little bits and pieces, and I'm sure I'll pop up at some product tanks. And I'm even going to try and get onto Productized stage one day as well.
Yeah.
After I failed last year because I ended up in hospital, but that was a whole different story.
But that was such an unlucky situation that we are now, fingers crossed for 2025 that everything is going to be super fine. And for our listeners, don't forget that Productized Conference 10th anniversary edition is coming up in October 2025.
Oh, there you go.
Very excited that Jason and lots of good people, great people in the product space are going to be with us, including yourself listening to this. I think it's going to be a really great gathering of the people that have been following the conference for the last few years. And don't forget, you can also subscribe to this podcast for more great conversations. Also follow Jason Knight. He's very active on LinkedIn. He has great memes. And please do stay updated. And if you don't do already, do check his podcast, One Night in Product. It's available in all major platforms.
All participating retailers.
Thank you so much.